Hey everybody, how's it going? Today we're going to be going over and showing you how to install the Roadmaster Crossbar-Style base plate kit here on our 2021 Jeep Wrangler Unlimited. So there's two different kinds of Roadmaster base plates available for your vehicle here. The Direct Connect and then the Crossbar Style, which is what we have here. So the Crossbar Style is a great option for you if you want to use Roadmaster's Rock Guardian, which is a vehicle protector, or if you have a tow bar that mounts on the vehicle when you're not using it. For those particular applications, you will have to use the Crossbar Style. But you can also use the Crossbar Style with any other tow bar, just so long as you have this quick connect. The Direct Connect is a little bit easier to use. It doesn't require this crossbar here, but again, it all comes down to what your setup is and what tow bar you want to use. So once we lift off our quick disconnect bar, this is what's going to be left. Now, you probably don't want to drive around town with the Jeep looking like this because it's kind of unsightly, but thankfully, these arms can actually be easily removed. All we need to do is simply pull one of these pins out on the side here, and then we can actually rotate it in either direction to remove it completely. So that's one way. We can also go out this way. And as you can see here, the arms are completely removable, and we can store these inside the vehicle, or you can store it in the storage compartment of your motorhome. And once they are removed, we get a factory-like look. The actual base plates are tucked behind the bumper there, so really the only thing you can see on the outside here is going to be your safety chain convenience links, but it's important for those to stick out a little bit. That way you're not scratching the body of the vehicle each time you go to hook up your safety chains. So what we can see here has a nice black powder coated finish, which is going to help protect all the metal components from rust, because it is on the underside of the vehicle, and as we are going to be hooking up metal arms to these, they kind of can get dinged up over time. So it's important to have that nice durable finish on there so we can keep the metal underneath protected. So one of my favorite parts of this base plate kit here is actually this electrical connector bracket. So this does come with the base plates, and this actually mounts to two pre-existing holes on the vehicle, so you don't have to do any drilling. And what this bracket allows us to do is it allows us to do several different things. Number one, we have our trailer connector mounting bracket. This is going to be a standard 6-pole trailer connector. It just simply bolts to that, and then we can run all of our electrical circuits through here to hook up to the motorhome. And then on the side here, we're going to have a little cutout, which worked perfect for our particular braking system that we were using. You may or may not use this depending on what system and motorhome you have, but for this particular Jeep here, we use the Air Force One. Therefore, we had a pre-drilled hole there for our air umbilical, so it really worked out great there. And then on the side here, we have a little cutout in this bracket here where actually it allows you to mount your breakaway switch here. So we didn't have to do any additional modifications to the Jeep here in order to mount these three components, which I really loved, because most of the time you have to do a lot of drilling and hacking in order to mount these things to get them to sit right on the vehicle. Having everything in one nice, easy, convenient little bracket here really makes things a lot better. So keep in mind, the base plate kit is just going to be one of the many things you need in order to successfully flat tow your Jeep here. In addition to that, you're going to need a compatible tow bar, which we talked a little bit about earlier. You're also going to need some sort of wiring system, safety cables, which more often than not come with the tow bar. And then last but not least, many states now require a supplemental braking system. So in regards to installation, this one is actually pretty straightforward. Jeeps, typically speaking, are pretty easy. They're much easier to install because they don't require nearly as many modifications to the vehicle. This one here, there's a couple different things you could fight with, but overall, it's definitely something a do-it-yourselfer can do by themselves at home. You don't need a lift, and it's mostly just common hand tools. You will need a torque wrench, so if you don't have one, I would just go down to your local auto parts store because they usually have a rent-a-tool program where you can get this for free. But aside from that, everything is pretty straightforward, very minimal modifications, and we can walk you through this entire process step by step now. So the first step of our installation here, we need to look at the front end of our Jeep and determine what type of front bumper and rock guard it has. So there's a few different configurations depending on your trim level, but basically what we're going to be looking for is the material construction of the front bumper, whether that's metal or plastic. You can tell ours here just by sort of scratching it. This is actually a plastic front bumper. And then underneath for our rock guard here, same thing. We need to determine if this is metal or plastic, and ours here is plastic as well, which you could tell by just knocking on or scratching it. So for our particular Jeep here, we have both a plastic front bumper and a plastic rock shield. So therefore, we're going to proceed to this step in the instructions that match our Jeep. So now we're going to come over to the passenger side here, sort of in this fender well. We're going to be looking at the frame here because we're going to be identifying this connector here. So if you have factory fog lights on your Jeep here, there's going to be a connector for it on the passenger side frame rail here. So we need to go ahead and unplug this. And the best way to do that is we're going to take a trim panel tool and we're going to pry that connector that holds it to the frame. Now once we have that loose, we're just going to reach inside here and basically we're going to separate these two connectors here. So you do that by depressing this tab here and then pulling out on this back connector. So this can be kind of difficult to do because some of these connectors are a little bit more challenging than others, but this one's pretty clean there, so it just came right off like so. So now we're going to come to the top of the bumper here, in between our grille and the back side of the front bumper. And if we look in down here, attaching to the top of the frame rail, we have these little plastic fasteners. So there's going to be one on each side. We're just going to take a flathead screwdriver, pry that center section out, and then pry the bottom out along with it. So again, we have two, one on each side. We need to remove them both. Now coming underneath the vehicle to our rock guard here, on either side we're going to have two screws which we'll remove with an 8mm socket. So now we're going to look from underneath the vehicle between the rock guard and our bumper here. So we're going to have a couple of these little push fasteners here securing this to the bottom of the vehicle. So there's actually 8 in total. One is hidden behind this shield here, but there's going to be 4 on each side for a total of 8. So we'll go ahead and get those all out now. We're going to do these ones here first just because they're a little bit more accessible, but we can use 2 different tools for this, an actual trim panel tool or just a flathead screwdriver. But basically there's going to be a section between the 2 heads that we'll just pull down and then remove it like so. So again, these ones on the outside here, definitely a little bit easier than the ones tucked away. So we'll show you these. So once we get that last one out, our rock guard should come down and out. We'll go ahead and just set this aside. So next thing we're going to be doing is we're going to be removing this metal shield here. So in order to remove it, we're going to have 1 bolt on either side as well as some clips at the top there. So we're going to go ahead and take a 16mm socket and remove those 2 bolts. Now once we have those 2 bolts removed, we're just going to slide it up and then it should pop out. So now we're actually going to be trimming this guard that we just removed and then reinstalling it. So you don't get any sort of diagram in regards to the trimming. It is just sort of a rough outline, but you can see we already have it marked out over here. We're just basically going to repeat that same thing on the other side. It actually works better if you flip it over. But basically what I've seen from the instructions is, here's our top attachment hole. We're going to be basically just tracing that top little crease there and then going all the way over until we hit this little groove here. And then we're just going to go straight down. And then here is going to be the material we're removing. So again, we don't have any specific measurements to go off of. We're just sort of roughly outlining it based on the instructions. But once I have both sides marked, I'm going to take a Dremel tool and I'm going to remove that material. So we've got one side cut here, so we'll obviously just repeat that same thing for the other side. Now the part that we're actually going to be keeping are these little ears here so we can save our attachment point for our skid shield. So this is the part we're actually going to be keeping. So what I'm going to do is, all that rough metal, that bare metal that we just exposed, I'm going to take a paint marker here, or if you have a can of spray paint, and we're just going to cover all that up so we don't have any issues with rust. Now I'd also like to point out that the hardware that we use to remove for this bolt here, we're actually not going to be reusing that. We're going to be using the M10 bolts that come in your kit. They look like this and they should be the only M10 fasteners you have. So we're actually going to be reusing we're going to be using these to resecure this part of our shield. So now we're ready to reinstall these sections of the frame guard that we removed. Now it should be pretty obvious which side goes where because the cut side is going to go be towards the inside. So just go ahead and mock it up like that. But we're going to take our bolts here. Now I don't think it's imperative or required here to put Loctite on these particular bolts, but we do have to do that for the rest of our bolts throughout our installation. So it's a good habit to get into to use it on these as well, and it's not going to hurt anything. So we'll just go ahead and begin loosely threading that on there like so. So you guys might be wondering why we removed that large section there but kept this. And I was kind of wondering that as well until I started to think about it a little bit more. And it looks like the reason they do that is so we can retain this attachment point on the bottom here for our shield. But now that I've got this side on, we'll go ahead and tighten her down, and I'll go ahead and repeat that same process on the other side. So you will need a 17mm socket to tighten this bolt down, and I don't believe there's any torque spec for this. Just get it nice and snug. So now we're going to sort of come underneath the vehicle looking in. So we're going to have 4 studs here on our bumper, 2 on the inside, 2 on the outside on each side of the vehicle. So we're going to have these nuts securing it to the bumper flange. We actually need to remove the bumper, so we're going to be removing 8 nuts in total, 2 on the inside, 2 on the outside, and then that same combo on the other side. So we'll grab an 18mm socket. You'll probably need a 1/2 inch drive just because these are kind of tight on here, but we'll just take our time here and remove each of these, and then we can pull the bumper off the vehicle. So I've got all of our nuts removed except one that I just have a few threads on, and basically that's just going to be help holding the bumper onto the vehicle until we're ready to take it off. So now I'm in position to take the bumper off. Now you can do this with yourself actually pretty easy. I just use these 2 little hooks up here to grab it, but if you have an extra set of hands, it's certainly going to make sure that it doesn't fall and get damaged. So just an extra measure of security there, but I'm confident doing myself, and I'm in position here, so I'm just going to reach under there and remove that final nut that we left on there earlier just to hold it in place. So now that I have that out, go ahead and take our bumper, and you do kind of have to slide it off. It doesn't just pop right off in most cases. There we go. Now we'll go ahead and just set it aside. So now that we have the bumper off, we're going to take a look on both the inside and the outside of either side of the frame. It doesn't matter which one. So we have our frame stiffening plates here that we're going to be removing. So we're going to start by removing this bolt here. Again, we have one on the inside, one on the outside, and we need to do this on both sides. So we'll just take a 16mm socket. We'll go ahead and remove those 2 bolts. So keep in mind our frame stiffeners here, we won't be reinstalling, but you can still hold on to these in case you ever remove the base plate kit from the vehicle, because you will need them for reinstallation. So next we're actually going to take our bumper here. We're going to set it on a nice flat sturdy surface because we need to do some trimming to some interior paneling here. This is actually a shield for the fog lamps. So we do need to trim this out a little bit. So this is the passenger side, just for reference, because we're going to have a wiring harness on the passenger side. So we're going to take a trim panel tool here. I'm just going to pry out that wiring clip there. That way I don't accidentally nick the wire with our cutoff tool. So I'll go ahead and peel that off, and I can sort of just push your wire to the side here. Now you can see you've already got it marked out, but basically we're just going to come down to this panel here, and there should be a 90 here where that little clip is. We're just going to mark there and come straight across to our other 90, and then we're just going to cut it out like so. So finish our cutting there. So you can see I have the X marked here of the material we're going to be removing. And on the passenger side, just be very careful because we have that wire behind here. But with that being said, we're going to go ahead and take our cutoff tool here and begin removing that material. And now that we have that removed, we'll just repeat that same thing on the other side. Now, thankfully for the driver's side, we don't have to worry about this wiring harness here. And if you wanted to, you could come back and just clean up the plastic here so it's a little bit nicer. So we're going to come to the outside of the frame now on either side here, and we need to mark 2 holes, this top hole here and this hole here. So we're on the driver's side for reference. So these 2 holes here, we need to enlarge to 9/16 of an inch. And again, we need to do this on both sides. So you don't need a long drill bit like the one we're using here, but it does make it a little bit easier because we actually have to drill through both sides of the frame here, and we want that as straight as possible. So if you have one, great, you can use it. If not, you could just use a standard 9/16 inch drill bit. And also, most kits actually don't go up to 9/16, most standard kits that is, so you could ideally use a 1/2 inch drill bit and just sort of wallow out the hole a little bit. That's probably not the preferred option or the best option, but it can be done if that's all you have. With that being said, we'll go ahead and make sure our drill bit is nice and level here. We'll begin drilling through the material. So we've got our bottom hole enlarged to the final size of 9/16 of an inch, and we've gone through both sides of the frame. So for this one here, it's a little bit easier because it's already a 1/2 inch hole, so you really only need to go up another step or so. So for this one here, it's going to be a little bit more difficult. So what I recommend is, starting with smaller drill bits and then work your way up to that final size. It's just going to make things much easier there and ensure that you can drill the hole straight through. So we're just going to start off with a little bit smaller drill bit there, go up a couple sizes here until we get the final size of 9/16 of an inch. So we've got all of our holes to the final size, so I'm going to go ahead and clean up all the rough edges on that metal of the frame here. So there's a couple different things you can do this. I actually find that a step drill bit works really well just to clean up all those extra burrs in the metal there. You obviously don't want to drill too much and enlarge the hole any further, but they do work really well just to get all those metal shavings off. But once we've done that, we'll come back with a black paint marker here. We'll go ahead and fill in all that metal we just exposed. That way there isn't any issues with rust. So now we need to take our base plate assembly. Now keep in mind of which side you're working on because they are side specific. So we're on the driver's side here, so we're going to grab the driver's side base plate assembly. And the easiest way to tell that is you basically want your safety chain convenience link pointed inward. But now we'll go ahead and basically just sort of come in at an angle like so from the bottom here and then push it up into position. And then we're going to temporarily secure it with our factory bolt that we used earlier for those bumper support brackets on that side hole here. So I'm just going to run that down loose by now just to hold it in place. So now that we have the base plate temporarily in position, we need to sort of come to the top here and sort of look down. So we should see, or we may not see actually, that's why we need to look, but basically what we're looking for is a space or a gap between the outside of the flange here and the inside of our base plate. So if we have a lot of movement back and forth, then chances are this gap is present because that's what's causing it. So in the installations that do have this gap, because not all models will, that's why we need to check, we'll be using the extra 1/2 inch spacers here for our respective bolt holes. So it's just something to keep in mind, and basically it is just kind of a visual inspection here. If we have so much side to side play and I can actually see a gap between there, that's when we need to use those washers. But according to Roadmaster, this isn't required for every application, therefore we do need to check ahead of time. So now we're ready to permanently affix the base plate to the frame of the vehicle here. We're going to start with the top hole on either side. So we're going to grab this 1/2 inch bolt here. So what we're going to do is you're going to place one of the 1/2 inch flat washers over the bolt, and we'll get this ready. We'll go ahead and set it aside though, because now we're going to use one of these pipe spacers on either side between the frame and the base plate. So we may need to adjust it side to side a little bit. And then for those applications that did require that 1/2 inch spacer or that 1/2 inch washer, because there's extra space, we'd install that now too. So this part is going to be kind of tricky, but basically I'm just going to be setting it from the top here into place. And then once I get it lined up, we need to take our bolt here and we need to sort of catch that hardware so it doesn't fall down. So I'm just going to slowly put some pressure on the bolt until I can push the washer down until I've trapped that. And then I'm going to do the same thing with that flat washer. There we go. Now we've trapped them both in the frame. I'm going to push that bolt all the way through here until we can get it to come out of the other side of the frame. So now I'm going to put my bolt until it's pretty much flush with the outside of the frame here, or the inside of the frame actually. And then we're pretty much just going to repeating that same thing. Now I looked over the instructions a couple times and it didn't quite say where this flat washer needs to be if we used it, but I'm just going to make sure it's the same on both sides and put it closest to the frame. So we're just going to sort of sandwich our hardware like that, stick it through there, and then I'm going to put some pressure on our bolt there. That way we can grab it as soon as it lines up and it doesn't fall down. So this can be kind of tricky. Just take your time at it. You really can't mess it up, but you can lose the washer down in there or the spacer there and you'll have to redo it. But aside from that, just take your time, shove everything through, and there you go. So now that we have our top bolt in place, we're going to repeat those same few steps here for our middle bolt. However, we actually won't be using the pipe spacer, and it is also a lot harder to get your washer into place. So a couple tips for this. Number one, Once you fit this up here originally, and you determine that you do need the spacers, you could take it back off and actually tape your washer to this bolt hole here. That way it's already aligned when you put the base plate on place. But if you didn't do that, like us, here's what we got around. Here's a little workaround that we came up with. So we just took a screwdriver here and pretty much just taped a flat washer to it. That way I can sort of shove this in between the frame and the base plate and get it into position there, and then I can pass our bolt through. So we're gonna give that a try because I really don't want to take all this off and do that again. But again, we don't really know that we're gonna need to do this until we get our base plate in position. So you're gonna have to work backwards either way if you want to get that taped on there. But if not, you can go ahead and give this method a try. So it took a bit of maneuvering with some screwdrivers and a hammer just to get that into place. Sometimes you actually have to pry out a little bit here on the outside of the base plate there to give you a little bit more room to work. But once we have it lined up, we can just stick our bolt through. And we're going to be doing that same thing on the inside as well, and I'm sure that's going to be equally as challenging. So we've got our second washer on the inside of the frame here for this middle bolt. Now this one was kind of challenging as well. You actually have to come in from here, but you don't want to go in the access hole in the frame there. So what we end up having to do is we took a pry bar, we sort of pried between the frame and the base plate to sort of wedge it out a little bit. It gave us more room to get our washer into place, but you're probably going to fight with that, to be honest. We certainly did. So just take your time there, be patient with level head, and you should be able to get it in there. But now that we have our two bolts here with the correct hardware on there, we're going to begin securing them. So we're going to take some red Loctite here. You really don't need a lot of this stuff, just a small little thin line. That's probably more than we need. But we'll finish these up with a flat washer, a split lock washer, and then a hex nut. We'll just loosely tighten that down for now. We're going to do that same thing here for the bottom. So now we're ready to secure our hole on the bottom here. So what we're going to do is we're going to be taking our 1/2-inch bolt here. It's a much shorter one that comes in your kit. We're going to place on a split lock washer along with a flat washer. You're going to place some red Loctite on the end of that. So what we're going to do is, if you're using these flat washers, we're going to go ahead and place that into the frame now, or between the frame and the base plate kit, and sort of trap it there with the bolt. And once we push it through, we should be able to line everything up. I was stuck there a little bit, so we're just going to sort of maneuver it into position a little bit better so we can get our bolt through. There we go. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take this wire block here, this nut block, and you're going to sort of bend this to sort of contour to the shape, because we actually need to come underneath here, stick that bolt through there, and then we're pretty much just going to be trying to line it up as best we can with the hole there in the frame. So once we think we got it on there, we'll go ahead and take our bolt here and begin threading it on there. Just like so. Now you'll know you have it cross-threaded because it'll get tight right away. Whereas if it's just threading on there normally, it should be pretty smooth up until you get to a certain point, then it should start to tighten up. So that's pretty good with there. Go ahead and leave that for now. So next thing we're going to do, you remember our factory bolts that we inserted temporarily earlier just to hold the base plate into position? We're going to remove those now because we want to add some Loctite, because we will be torquing them down here soon. So on each side, again, remove that, add some Loctite, and then just loosely thread it on. We're not ready to torque it yet, but we will in a couple steps. So we have one on the outside and one on the inside. So the reason that we didn't put thread locker on there when we just mocked this up is because we had quite a few steps between that when we want to torque it down. So we didn't want that thread locker to dry on us. So that's why we waited until this step here. But the next thing we're going to do is we're going to look at the flange. So basically our factory bumper beam flange, we want to make sure that our base plate isn't obstructing that. And if I look in there, I can kind of see that it's hitting on it on that bottom hole. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some sort of pry tool. I'm just going to stick it in there. That way I can maneuver the base plate kit there so there isn't any interference when we go to reinstall our bumper. So you can see there, I move that plate down a little bit, and now we should be able to place our bumper beam studs through that hole there without any interference. So you want to make sure that they're clear on both sides. But once we have this side done, we're going to repeat that same process on the other side. Keep in mind, we're not torquing down any of our hardware yet. So now we're going to take our front bumper here. We're going to go ahead and set it back into position on the vehicle. So now that we have the bumper in position, we'll go ahead and re-secure it with our factory hardware. So now that we have our bumper in place with all of our hardware secure, we're ready to go ahead and tighten down the hardware that's securing our base plates to the frame of the vehicle. So in order to do this, you're going to need a 3/4 inch socket and a 3/4 inch wrench for all of our aftermarket bolts. So we're going to start by using an impact to tighten these down, just to save us a little bit of elbow grease there. We switch over to our torque wrench. So we're just going to start at the top pretty much and work your way down. Now again, just working our way down, we're going to tighten the 2 factory bolts using a 16mm socket. And now that we have our factory bolts tight on either side, we'll work our way down to the middle bolt here. Same thing, we'll snug it up with our electric ratchet, then we'll come back with our torque wrench so we can torque it to the specifications in our instructions. Now finally we have our lowermost bolt. Now once we get that one torqued down, now we're actually going to clip off the remaining of our little handle wire here. Sometimes you can actually sort of just pry them loose there by breaking that wire just by moving it back a couple times. But if you can't do that, let's go ahead and take a pair of cutters and just cut the rest off. So now that we have this side pretty much wrapped up, all that's left to do is just repeat that same process over here on the other side. So now the next thing we need to do is we need to take our rock guard here and go ahead and trim it according to our instructions based on what bumper type we have. So once you have that figured out, there's going to be a diagram in there specific to your application that'll allow you to get the correct amount of material that we need to remove from either side here. And this is basically just going to allow for clearance of our arms for our base plate kit. So they have a reference point in this instructions, which is the radius here. So this is what we're measuring from. You measure over from here to here, and then from here to here. And then we measure from this top edge here down. So again, we'll just trace that out on both sides there, and then we can take a Dremel tool here and begin removing the material. So they do make a note that these marks here are just sort of as a reference. When you hold it up, you may need to take more material out, so just keep that in mind. But with that being said, now that we have an approximate mark out, we'll go ahead and begin removing that material. So there we go. That looks pretty good to me. I'm going to go ahead and repeat that same process on the other side. I'm going to come back with a file or a piece of sandpaper here and clean up all those rough edges. So now that we have our rock shield trimmed, we can go ahead and test fit it on the vehicle, and assuming it fits, we'll go ahead and reinstall it with all of our fasteners that we removed earlier, but in the reverse order. At this time, we'd also want to go ahead and re-secure anything removed from the bumper, such as the electrical connector and our push pin fasteners up top. So ours is a bit of a tight fit, but we should still be able to get it up there. If we wanted, we can come back and trim a little bit more to make it easier, but I don't think we're going to need to do that. So now that we've got everything buttoned up on the vehicle here, the last step is going to be optional. So this is the electrical connector here for our wiring. So we can choose to install this, or if you have a different type of wiring you'll be using, this one is designed for the 6-pole. So if you have one of those, great, you'll need to install this. If not, you can just skip this step and complete your installation. But again, if you do need this, you're just gonna follow these few simple steps. First, we're gonna look up under the vehicle here. Now on the driver's side, starting on the driver's side, we're gonna have two of these connectors here that we removed earlier. We're gonna be removing them again here. So we're gonna have the two closest to our base plate arm over on the driver's side, to be a little bit more specific. And then basically how this works is the two holes here on our electrical connector are actually going to line up with those two holes there. But we do have some brackets and stuff that are going to go up top. So we're going to take our electrical plate here along with our 3/8" bolts and our 3/8 flat washer. So we're going to get two of these set up. They're going to go through either side of the holes in our bracket here, just like so. And then we're going to flip it over. And then we're going to be placing a spacer tube on either side here, just like so. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to hold this up onto the vehicle and align the holes there like so. So this is pretty much how it's going to mount, and then the top there we're going to have some nylock nuts which is going to secure it to that metal bracing inside our bumper there. So if you want, you can have someone hold this up for you, or you can kind of hold it up yourself with one hand and then secure it on the back with your other hand. So if you don't have an extra set of hands, what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to tape the nuts, or the bolts rather, to that plate there. That way I don't have to worry about them falling down while I'm holding it up, and I can use my other hand to secure the nuts up top. So now that I have everything in position with one hand, I'm going to reach back up behind the bumper there with my nylock nut. And you're not going to be able to see anything, you're just going to be feeling for it. But once you get that hex bolt on there, just go ahead and thread on your nylock nut. We have two of them total. So now all that's left to do is to take a 9/16" socket and wrench and go ahead and tighten down our two bolts. And now with everything secure, that's going to do it today for our look and installation of the Roadmaster Crossbar-Style base plate kit here on our 2021 Jeep Wrangler Unlimited.